All right, it's that time of year again. We're all gearing up for tax season. And if your CPA is anything like mine, they are asking you where your records are for the year so that they can start that process of preparing your return. Now, as a bookkeeper, I am absolutely positively neurotic about my data entry, but if you as a small business owner have found that you've gotten a bit behind, I'm going to show you how you can quickly and easily get through a year's worth of data entry in a condensed period of time. So in an ideal world, you'll be using your bank feeds to get a lot of this done, but we're also going to be looking at how this is supported by the work that you would be doing in QuickBooks throughout the year. So in order to get started, what you'll want to do is you'll want to go to your bank feeds tab or bank transactions tab and make sure that your accounts are set up and connected. So in order to do that, we can go to accounting right here, and it will be the first screen that pops up. Now, if you have done any customization of your dashboard, you may actually have it bookmarked, and you can navigate to it by mousing over bookmarks and selecting it there as well. Now, as you can see, this is, and to be clear, this is a sample file, so all of these transactions are purely hypothetical, but I have over 400 transactions here that need to be classified in order for this theoretical tax return to get done. So how do I parse out getting all of this done and ready and over to my CPA knowing that these numbers are complete and accurate? Well, there are a couple of different things that I want to call your attention to. So first, you can filter down these transactions so that you're not looking at all of the transactions at once. And sometimes if you have this many transactions hanging out in your bank feed, that can be kind of overwhelming. So you have several different options for how you pare these transactions down. If you want to go month by month and add all of the transactions and reconcile your accounts and then move on to the next month, you can very easily do that by using this filter right here. Instead of saying all dates, you could say that you only wanted to see transactions for January of 2025 so that you can get all of them entered, reconcile, and then move on. So in order to do that, I would put in 010125 and then say 013125. Now that 6-digit date code is a shortcut. It will automatically enter in the slashes and everything else that I need. So if I hit apply, I'm now going to go from seeing 216 transactions in my checking account to seeing only the 17 that took place in January. This kind of makes it a little bit more accessible and a little bit less overwhelming if you're looking at bulk data entry. Now, that's one possible way that you can do this. And a cool thing is that if you do a filter like that and then click into your other accounts, that filter will apply to all of them. So you could sit down and go through each month and then move on to the next one. That is definitely an approach that I take if I am getting into a client file for the first time and I'm not really sure what's been done and what hasn't, and I really want to work piecemeal through and get to know how money flows into and out of the various accounts. All right, another way that we could approach this, because in an ideal world, we're using QuickBooks holistically, right? We are entering invoices that we're sending out to our clients, and we're entering bills so that we can pay our vendors in a timely manner. And QuickBooks will match transactions up, although sometimes it needs a little bit of an extra nudge to go ahead and do that. So let's say that I wanted to look at transactions that have a match already available and recorded in QuickBooks, because sometimes it's really nice to just go ahead and get those ones that have matches available out of the way, right? It just cuts down on the noise and on what we're seeing. So I could go ahead and sort by match or categorize. And what that will do is it will pull anything that has a rule or anything that has a suggested match already entered in QuickBooks up to the top. And I can sort through and match the transactions that have those items available. So you can see here, these particular transactions, it was the same amount going out to the same vendor every single month. So since I have multiple suggested matches for each one, what I would want to do is I would want to look here and go, okay, this bill or this payment went out on 2/9 of 2026. which of these bills is the most likely to be associated with that. And as a general rule, it will be the one with the date most closely associated, though that is not universally true. And if you are doing bulk data entry like this, it never hurts to double check. Now, I created each of these bills with these transactions in mind, so I can go ahead and say with high confidence that this should be matched to the February bill. So once that's matched, it gets moved into my bank register and I can move on to the next one. So I would want to go through and do the rest of these items here in much that same way. All right, so now that I've shown you how that particular piece works, I'm going to go ahead and quickly run through and do the rest of these transactions, matching them up with the most high confidence match that we have available. Now that we've added all of the transactions with multiple possible matches, we have the ability to go in and start matching up the transactions that have only one match available. Now, this means that QuickBooks is very highly confident that this truly will be a match for this particular transaction. So let's go ahead and take a look at these. Now, you can see we received payment from a whole variety of different customers here. Now, what we would want to be checking for in this is, did we receive the payment at a time that makes sense for the invoice? And if we're ever dealing with something where we might have the same invoice price going out over and over and over again, we want to be sure that the payment is, of course, matched to the correct customer. Now, if I'm remembering correctly, and I'm pretty sure I am, none of my examples are ones where it would be super common to have a duplicate of it, right? It's not anything where I have multiple invoices going out for, say, $250, and that's a recurring amount that I see. They're all pretty unique amounts. And on top of that, we have the ability to look at the dates and confirm that the invoice is close to the date that we received the payment, and that it matches up with the payment detail, okay? So in this case, we have Hugo Park, and I see that the invoice is for Hugo Park. And then we have, it's for $343.32. And sure enough, that payment that I received is for that same amount. So given that, I can look at this and go, okay, this is a high confidence match. I should go ahead and match this transaction so that it lines up with the invoice that is currently showing as outstanding on my books. And you can see we have a whole host of these transactions. So I'm going to go ahead and move through the process of classifying all of these guys so that we can move on to the next type of transaction that we're going to want to look at. All right, now that we've made it through that particular section, we can look at the next instance where we might have matches available on our books. Now, unlike the previous examples that we just went through, where those were transactions that were already in our books, they were either bills that we entered or invoices that we had entered and sent to customers. These are a slightly different kind of match. Anytime you see the word pair next to a transaction, that actually means that QuickBooks is suggesting that there is a match available in one of your other bank feeds. That doesn't necessarily mean that this transaction is already somewhere on your books. So let's go ahead and look at what that looks like in practice. So we can see right here on 2/16 of 2026, which just happens to be the first one that comes up here, I have a pair available to my Business American Express credit card. So let's go ahead and look at the Business American Express credit card and make sure that I see that $985.98. Oh, and of course, since it's match categorized, I could sort by received to find that a little bit more quickly. And sure enough, there it is. On 2/16 of 2026, I have a transaction for $985.98, and it's suggesting a pair to my business checking account. Now, If you are confident in the match, you can go ahead and just select pair without checking back and forth, but sometimes it makes sense to look back and forth, especially, again, if you're dealing with something where you pay $1,000 regularly and you want to make sure that you're matching it up with the correct $1,000. Anyway, I can now navigate back over to my checking account, sort by match, categorize, and then go ahead and start to pair these American Express transactions since I see that they do correspond with transactions in my Amex. Now, the cool thing about pair transactions that didn't happen previously is that if you hit pair on one side, it's actually also automatically going to post that on the credit card side. So it's going to remove those transactions from your credit card bank feed once they are posted in this bank feed. So that saves a little bit of time and also potential confusion that can happen if you're not then matching something from the credit card bank feed. Now, I'm sure you noticed when I was matching up transactions for invoices and things that were really specific, I actually do hit match next to each one of them because I want to double check and make sure that the matches that I am creating do in fact tie to transactions. However, when we have a situation like this where it's all very high confidence matches and we know that those are also happening on the credit card side, you can kind of shortcut this a little bit by first selecting the first transaction that you would like to add, and then scrolling down, hitting Shift, and selecting the last transaction that you would like to add. Now, when you go ahead and post these transactions, that's going to post all 12 of them at once, saving a little bit of time. All right, so those are now posted. And if I go ahead and refresh my screen here, I can see also that my transactions on my credit card went down from 180 something to 173. And that's because all of those pair transactions got added when I posted the transactions here. So that's really fantastic and a great way to cut down a little bit on data entry. All right, let's go ahead and keep working through this checking account here. Now, we have a few different things at play. First of all, we still have a whole bunch of payments that we have received from our customers that need to be classified. But a couple of things that I want to call your attention to here are we do see some invoices here from clients that we had or we see some payments here from clients that we had invoices for on the books. So this is a really great illustration of the fact that while QuickBooks tries its best, it doesn't always find all of the available matches. And sometimes we have to give it a little bit more data to push it in the right direction. So, for example, I know that I entered all of the invoices for Amanda Ray's. Okay, those are all on the books and waiting to receive payment against them. So what I would want to do for this particular invoice, I would want to click match right here. And then I would want to go and find the transaction for Amanda Ray's so that I could make sure that those matched up. Now you can sort by transaction amount, payee, or date. In this case, since I know who the payee is, I'm going to go ahead and sort by payee. And it brings Amanda Ray's to the top. Now I can see right here, I have this invoice. It's for $1,153.15. And it was on 2/1 of 2025. The payment came through on 2/10 of 2025. So that is actually a very high confidence match. So QuickBooks didn't catch this particular instance, and we want to go ahead and instruct it that that's how that payment should be applied. I can go ahead and click match right here, or click the checkbox right here, excuse me, and then select match. And now that payment that I received will be matched up with that transaction. So we can see there are other instances of this. For example, Hugo Park was another one where we had invoices that were entered. So if we did enter invoices for clients, we would want to go through that process and make sure that we were applying all of these payments that were received against outstanding invoices first and foremost, because that completes that AR cycle. Now, if we did not enter invoices for clients, we could actually go ahead and manually classify the transaction. And I'll show you how to do that in just one moment. But first, I'm going to go through and find the remaining matches for the invoices so that I know I am only working on receiving payments that don't have an invoice available on the books. There are a few different ways you could do this. You could click into each one that you think has an invoice open, but I'm actually going to go ahead and look at my AR report and then match up so that we know for sure we're working in the correct invoices and saving a little bit of time in the process. So one really good possible thing about using this matching feature is that it could catch potential errors that have happened in the course of entering transactions. So for this particular example, I can see right here, I have an invoice for Hugo Park for $622, but the payment is $662. Now, in that instance, I would want to check and see whether the error was on my side. Did I accidentally make a mistake when I was entering this invoice? Or did the client make an error when they were paying it and possibly overpay me here? Now, in this particular instance, I made a fat finger error when I was entering the invoice. This one is on me. So if I close this and then come back in, it is going to have the correct number reflected there. But one cool thing to note is that if you do try to match something and it isn't an exact match, QuickBooks will show you that there is a difference of whatever the amount is, and it will not let you add the transaction until you resolve that particular error. So that's a lovely feature of this whole match function. So that was a prime example of why I am a two-monitor person when it comes to doing data entry and working in QuickBooks. I had my AR aging detail up on one side and I had my bank feed screen on the other so that I could go back and forth and make sure that I had matched up all of the different transactions that I had open invoices for on my books. Now that that has been done, anything that is left still in the bank feed is something that I can just go ahead and start to classify. Now, there are a few different ways that you might want to go about this. Now, when it comes to data entry, again, it's nice to go ahead and filter things down where we can so that we can help ourselves more easily digest all of this information. Now, we've already moved from having over 200 transactions to having a little over 100 here. And that's fantastic. But we can do even better and pretty quickly by implementing a few quick items. Now, let's say that I wanted to go ahead and just finish getting all of the money in transactions added to the books and then worry about classifying all of the expense transactions. If I wanted to do that, I could filter by money in transactions. And then what I would actually want to do here is I would want to look at whether there are any rules that I could put in place to classify these transactions a bit more quickly and easily. Okay, now you can see here we have Stripe deposits and Square deposits. And those things have the same bank feeds and detail every single time. Now, if you have multiple things that you sell on Stripe or Square, creating a rule might not be your best bet because you might want to have a little bit more detail about what makes up that income. However, for the purposes of my example business here, I'm only selling training materials on those platforms. So I could actually create a rule for both of those types of transactions so that it would automatically classify it. Now, a cool thing we can do is if we sort by bank description, it's going to sort it in alphabetical order. So we can see how many Square deposits we've had and how many Stripe deposits we've had. We can now create rules for those two transactions and knock out a whole bunch of classification in one fell swoop, which is pretty great. So I'm going to go ahead and create a rule for each of those two transactions. that very quickly, I just created 2 rules there. If you would like to see in detail how to create a rule and how to build out customizations in it, I do have a separate video for that. It will be linked below. But since we're working on getting through data entry quickly, I just wanted to quickly demonstrate how creating a rule for a transaction can mean that we can add a whole bunch of them at once. So now I have all of these transactions that are ready to be posted because I know that this information is correct. So now that I have a rule associated with every single transaction on this page, I can actually select at the very top all of the transactions because all 50 of them have a rule associated with them, and I can post all of these transactions. Now, we can see that's immediately going to take the number of transactions that I still have left to classify way down, which is phenomenal. And I'm not yet done because I still have more transactions on the next page that this rule picked up. So I can now go ahead and mark that last one, hit the Shift key on my keyboard, and then mark this top one and post an additional 11 transactions. Now, I just want to take a second to show you here. We have already taken this particular account from having over 200 transactions in it to having fewer than 70 transactions left to classify in a relatively short amount of time. Now, this demonstration was built out in kind of an ideal world where we have a lot of data readily available to us and there were matches available and things were happening. So data entry might take a little bit longer depending on your unique circumstances, but this really does demonstrate that if you have QuickBooks set up and working for you the way that it should be working for you, you can achieve an awful lot in a very short span of time. So from here, we now know that none of the rest of these people have invoices hanging out in QuickBooks. So these 3 clients, we never had invoices for them. So what we're going to do from here is we would first determine what services were provided to them. And since this sample company is a bookkeeping company, we can very reasonably assume that anytime a client paid us, it was for bookkeeping services. So we can see here, QuickBooks kind of does its best with suggesting possible categories that these particular transactions might fit into. But as we've also seen, it can miss the mark. So if I go in here and update this to bookkeeping services, what we can see is that it has now automatically updated all of the transactions associated with Brian Chen to bookkeeping services. Now, it hasn't put anything in the from to. While it is not required for you to put anything in the from to category, it's always highly recommended. It's just nice to have that little bit of additional information. And as a general rule, you already have the vendor or the client set up in QuickBooks or can quickly add them. And it just adds a little bit of extra detail if you're ever going back and looking at the information later. So I'm going to go ahead and enter the name Brian Chen. And see it again automatically fills that in for all of the transactions for Brian Chen. Now, this is a great example of this particular feature working really, really well in QuickBooks. One area where it might not work so well is if you have a lot of checks and if you're entering all of the check information. You might enter who the check was written to and then what expense account or income account it belongs to, and it will then apply that to all the different checks. That's a less ideal situation because for the most part, you're going to be writing checks to multiple different people for multiple different possible expenses. But this is an instance where this particular feature of pushing it out to everybody with that name works really nicely. So now I can go ahead and select the first one, hit the Shift key on my keyboard, select the last one, and then post those 10 transactions. I'm now going to go ahead and do the same for Isabel King and Jared Simmons because those are also bookkeeping clients. Now that I have all of that information, I can actually mark all of these transactions and say post. And that's it. I have now officially entered all of the money in transactions for this particular account. Now I can go ahead and reset this filter, go back to all transactions, and look at the remaining transactions still left to be classified. Now, this is another great example of where a rule might be really beneficial. I have all of these transactions for co-working space rent, right? They're all to the same vendor and they're all for the same amount. And if you're familiar with your business, you're going to be able to quickly identify anything like this. This is where it's really great to possibly sort by bank description instead of sorting by date or sorting by match or categorize. This will group all of the like transactions together so that you can see where you would benefit from creating rules. So I'm going to go ahead and create a rule for this particular transaction, but I'm also going to go and look and see if there are any other ones where I might benefit from creating a rule. And it looks like, sure enough, I have Smith Consulting. They're another one where I might benefit from making a rule because I see that I have outgoings to them for the same amount over several months. It also looks like there was one credit card payment that didn't get lumped in with the rest of them, so I'm going to go ahead and post that now. All right, so now that I have a rule associated with all of those, I can go ahead and select again from the bottom wherever I would want that to be, and then scroll all the way up to the top, hit shift, and then select there, and it will mark off all of the transactions between the two, and I can go right ahead and post those transactions. Now, what's really cool is that we are down to the final few transactions. So in a little bit over a half an hour here, we went from having over 200 transactions sitting in our checking account to having just 14 left to go. And what's even cooler about this is that actually all of them have a pair available, which means that we can see them somewhere else in our bank feed. And in this case, it happens to be in our business savings account. So again, if you're new to using the pair feature, it's never a bad idea to do a quick spot check to make sure that the transactions you're seeing here do flow through over here. So I'm going to check this one. I see on 1/20 of 2025 that we had a $100 transfer to savings. So I'm going to go look in here and make sure that I am seeing that same transaction. And sure enough, there it is. Transfer from checking paired to business checking account. That is perfect. So if I go back to the business checking account here, select all of these, and then post them, not only am I now done with entering all of the transactions for my business checking account, but you can also see that the transactions for my business savings account here went down to just 14 instead of 28 because it added all of those transactions. Now, this right here, the remaining transactions in our business savings account, is another fantastic example of where we could use a rule. So obviously, we don't have a lot of activity happening in this savings account. We had money coming in from our business operating account, and then we had the interest that we were earning on that money as it was being saved. So since we have all interest earned, we could enter bank and then enter interest income. And we would see that actually does apply it to all of them. But if we wanted to offer that as a classification to all the transactions that flow through in the future, I would actually click here and then create a rule for that. What we now see here is the fact that all of these transactions have a rule associated with them, and I can go ahead and post all of them. All right, so now we are down to only the transactions that are on our American Express credit card here. And there's another cool thing here. We've already added all the payments, so we've already done everything that flows back and forth through the accounts. Really, what we should be seeing here remaining are transactions that just need to be classified. So this is another point where you can kind of decide how you want to break this process down. Maybe you want to go month by month and classify everything as it's happening, But as a general rule, the first thing that I'll do if I have a lot of data entry to get through quickly, once I have found all of the matches, all of the pairs, all of that, I will go ahead and sort by bank description so that I can look at where I would benefit from creating rules to expedite that data entry. And as we can see right here, we have right off the bat instances where we have a lot of transactions for the same vendor over and over and over again. So it would be a really good idea if we have the time and patience to go ahead and create the rules so that we can get through all this data entry really, really quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and start that process here, and then we'll check in on the other side. All right, now here is where we might benefit from looking a little bit more at the data and creating some broad sweeping rules that might capture multiple items. Now I can see here I have hotel and it says conference Los Angeles, right? So maybe that's the Los Angeles Convention Center and I was staying at a hotel there. Well, if I'm creating rules, I could theoretically create a rule that looks for the word hotel in the bank text or description. And that would then automatically classify that item to hotels and then travel, right? Now, there is something to be said for certain transactions, you might want to have the actual hotel's name, but there are some times where that just honestly doesn't make a lot of sense. If you're only going to be staying at a hotel once, you don't necessarily want to create a separate vendor for every single hotel that you're ever going to stay at. You might want to go ahead and create a single hotel vendor and then have all of your hotel expenses go into that particular category or that particular vendor profile. It will still go to travel expenses. Same with some of these other items. Now, if we look at this, all of these say conferences, but if I click into this, some of them, when we look at the full bank description, actually say airfare, or they might say something else, something like meals, right? So looking at these details and looking for keywords where we can create rules that will help simplify this process and help streamline data entry is really, really important. I'm going to go ahead and keep going. Gone through and created a handful of rules. What I might want to do to kind of whittle down the transactions that I still have yet to interact with and to create rules for and classify is go ahead and sort by match or categorize so that all of the transactions with rules associated to them come to the top. Now, we can kind of go through, and I do always recommend doing a little bit of a spot check to make sure that your rules are working as you intend them to, okay? For example, you can see here I have Starbucks and I also have things like Temple Coffee. And those are just under coffee shops. Now, this is a similar example where if you are constantly going to be going to the same coffee shop, maybe it's worth entering their name as a vendor. But if you're possibly going to be going to lots of different coffee shops and maybe only once or twice, you could just create an umbrella category for the vendor name and then have all of those transactions flow into that particular vendor profile instead of having them go to a whole bunch. Now, one thing to keep in mind as far as coffee runs are concerned, that it's important that you are documenting these things. I don't want you to go to your CPA and say, well, Holly said I can write all of this off. Not necessarily, only if you are meeting the key criteria. You want to be sure that it's for a client appointment. You want to be sure that you're documenting all of that, hopefully writing all of it down on the receipt. And then you want to be able to produce those documents if anyone, including the IRS, ever asks, okay? But for the purposes of this example, we're going to assume that we have all of that documentation and can prove all of that. So if a rule has been applied here at this point, we're going to go ahead and start adding these transactions. Now, you can see after just a few minutes of work, we have a lot of rules already there. So we're about to cut this way down from 172 transactions. Let's see how much we can cut it down. So we already see that the first 50 transactions here all have rules associated with them. So I'm going to select that and then post those transactions. Now let's see how many on the next page also have rules applied to them. All right, so now looking at this, we're down to 122 transactions, and we're just going to start scrolling and see. Now, still scrolling. All right, it looks like the whole next page also has rules associated with it. So we can go ahead and add that as well. So look at that. In just a few minutes worth of work, we were able to add over 100 transactions. That is fantastic. Okay, and look, the rules are still coming. Look at this. We have a whole bunch more rules. Now, the rules do stop partway down the page, so I can select the last transaction that's picked up by a rule, scroll back up to the top, hit Shift, select the checkbox there, and then post those 21 transactions. Now, what's super cool, again, we went just now from having over 170 transactions. Now we are left with only 50 transactions, 51, that we still have to work with and classify. This means that in the span of about an hour, we've gotten through data entry for almost a full year. That's pretty fantastic. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and look at some of these other items and see where else I might be able to create a rule. I'm going to go back to sorting it by bank description because, again, that's just my preferred way of dealing with it. So I see here we have office supplies and Office Depot. Looks like we can probably go ahead and create rules for those items. So we'll go ahead and do that. All right, so for this, we were able to go ahead and create a rule for those office supply ones. So I'm going to go ahead and get those added. Now we can see here, there were multiple instances where we went to Old Soul Coffee here in Sacramento. Maybe I want to go ahead and create a rule to capture that, or maybe I want to go ahead and just enter their information in as a vendor, or put in coffee shops rather, and then say, yep, this is for meals and entertainment. Those are being picked up by the rule, so we can go ahead and add them. And now, based on that bit of work, what we are left with is 31 transactions left to classify. Now, it looks like to me there are some where I could go ahead and still work through and create some additional rules, which I may very well do, but don't be surprised if as you whittle this down, there are transactions that just take a little bit more effort, okay? You might have to do a little bit of research and find out what the transaction was for. You might have to go into Amazon and see whether or not it should have been, a cost of goods sold transaction versus office supplies. You might have to do a little bit of research and digging, whereas before we were just doing broad strokes data entry. So at this point, I am actually going to go ahead and wrap up this video. I'm going to finish doing all of this data entry here, assuming that it was just things that needed to be researched a skosh more. But the important thing that I want to look at here is the fact that we went from having almost 400 transactions to be classified to less than 50 in a very, very short span of time. So if you are behind on your data entry for your business, take a deep breath. It is absolutely manageable to get this caught up. And even further, if you are creating rules and putting infrastructure in place and doing all of these things, it is then easier to maintain. And I highly, highly recommend, if you are watching this video because you are trying to scramble and catch up for tax season, make a promise to yourself that it will be the last time. Because if you put in a little bit of work and create some rules and build some infrastructure, you can get through monthly bookkeeping and monthly data entry in a fairly short span of time. I can tell you that I personally only spend about an hour to an hour and a half on my own bookkeeping on a monthly basis, and my reports are always up to date, accurate, and ready to go. So I can take advantage of things like tax planning and looking at my business and deciding where to invest the time, energy, and resources that I have. Thank you so very much for watching this. I'm Holly from Accrual Mistress Bookkeeping and Consulting. Now, I do want to remind you, this is really only step one of getting caught up for tax time. Now, we still do have to go through and reconcile our accounts, and that is going to be my next video. So if you would like to look at how to reconcile accounts and how to go through that process and find errors and resolve them, please do like and subscribe, and I will make sure that you see that video next. Have a good day.